Hi, I'm Dr. Janice Morrow. Thanks for joining us for another episode of American Mood Swings, where we talk about the brain and all things related to mental health. Welcome. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of American Mood Swings. I'm Dr. Janice Morrow, and I'm here interviewing our guest today is Nicki Reisberg from the podcast Scrolling to Death. She has a background in big tech and turned in and kind of transitioned into a social media child safety advocate. So we're just gonna let her take the floor. She's gonna talk about so many different, for parents out there, anybody who's a parent, you'll find this episode especially interesting because she's going to talk about the pros and cons of all these different social media apps that our kids are on and teenagers, and the dangers that you might not be aware of, important issues like we've all heard on the news about TikTok, and most people have no idea. They think it's this great app and I'm going to die without it. I need it for my business. They don't realize the security risk. So I'm just really excited that Nicki's here today. So Nicki, I'd love to learn a little bit more about your background and how you went from this you were in big tech, you went from social media manager and transition. So let's talk a little bit about your background.
Sure, Janice, and thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you today. So, I was a social media manager. I had my own business for about 15 years. I had global clients. I was doing really well, and but personally, I stopped using social media in 2020. So there was some buildup of feelings around it. My social media use was making me just feel bad and feel anxious. And I was also questioning, I was sharing my kids a lot during that time on social media and started questioning that action and how does that actually benefit my kids. And then I also watched that year, The Social Dilemma, and I was a little shocked at that. And so I did my own research. I started doing my own research in 2020. And so over I guess those 3 years off of social media, but researching social media, I found out a lot of startling things and a lot of startling research on screen use and social media use. And I was super troubled by it, specifically how these things were affecting our kids. And so I felt called to make sure that parents know this research, and I want them to know, how bad it can get and how many kids are getting affected, and then that these mental health harms or actual physical harms can happen to any child. And so, as soon as I was able and had this ideation and was able to make it happen, I started this podcast called Scrolling to Death. And I interview experts, I interview parents, I interview even adolescents to try to understand, how we got here to a place where everyone's handing their kid an unrestricted iPhone at, 8 or 10 years old, to this issue where, 40% of there's a stat that always sticks out to me is 30% of teenage girls seriously consider suicide. So there's so many stats I could pull, but there's just so much that's concerning related to using these platforms that I wanted to make sure parents know, and then can make their own decisions once they, know the actual research and the stories. So that's kind of my journey, and I'm excited to be sharing this with parents that are listeners of your podcast.
Well, I'm learning a lot. I'll just share something real. A few months back, the
Mm-hmm.
actress Julia Roberts
Mm-hmm.
had posted, you probably saw it. It was just a little
I
clip.
did.
It went viral. So if people out there hadn't seen Julia Roberts, everybody knows who she is. So
Mm-hmm.
she was like, her niece was over and they were just having breakfast, playing games, and she shared a picture
Mm-hmm.
because she thought it was such a happy moment for her. And
Mm-hmm.
she did this whole like little video after that because she got all kinds of hateful comments from people out there about like how she was ugly and didn't look as pretty as she did, and how much it affected her. And she's one of the most
Mm-hmm.
biggest successful Hollywood actresses. And she said,
Mm-hmm.
I can only, something to the effect like, I can't even imagine what it would be like for these, because I'm an older woman. I mean, I've got confidence, but as a young woman, like a teenage girl, being exposed to
Mm-hmm.
this kind of this ugliness. And it
Yeah.
was so interesting. So your podcast, it profiles most all of the big social media companies, their
Hmm.
weaknesses, how things need to change, the current legislation right now in Congress. So let's
Yeah.
talk about some of these apps. And I guess we'll start. The one that's been all over the news the last couple of weeks is TikTok. So if you
Hmm.
could just kind of like, for someone out there who's never heard of it, or they all they know is like they get cute videos on it. Let's talk about TikTok.
Yeah. So most parents think or have thought that TikTok is just cute dance videos, and that's what they market themselves as. But what it is, it's a video app that you have to be 13 or older to sign up without parental permission. But those age limits don't mean anything because kids can sign up for these platforms and just put in any birthday. Uh, but TikTok was in the news this week because President Biden signed a new law into effect that basically TikTok, who's owned by a Chinese company called ByteDance, and ByteDance will need to sell TikTok to an American company, or we will ban it from our app stores here in the U.S. And the issue that we were seeing was around national security. So TikTok gathers a lot of our data when we download it to our app. More, I would say more than a lot of other social media apps. They can download, it tracks what you're doing on your phone where you have the app downloaded, but also on other devices that are connected to this device that you have. And it could potentially also pull from other devices that are connected to your Wi-Fi network. So this company is getting a lot of our data, and that is a concern to our federal government. And so they feel the need to bring this app back into American hands. Also, there is concern about influence. So young people are incredibly reliant on this platform. I would say even addicted to this platform. So, and as a group, these young people are easily persuaded. And so imagine a platform that's in the hands of the control of any government being able to make a little change, and suddenly millions of children are being influenced to believe in some conspiracy theory or misinformation or political information, really anything. And so this influence can be incredibly powerful for good or bad. And I think that it's important to get it into our own hands here in America. I also just think it's important for parents to understand that TikTok is not just fun dance videos, that what's been in the news lately is a lot of suicide content that's being found on TikTok, which would just be shocking to most people. But I'm going to just tell you a couple of the studies. One recent study by a group called Primetime. They created numerous TikTok accounts as 13-year-olds, and within like 14 minutes of scrolling, they were just inundated with posts promoting and glorifying suicide. Another study found 8.8 billion views on suicide related hashtags. I mean, videos, Janice, like 5 ways to end it without feeling any pain, videos that teach kids how to create an at-home concoction that'll shut their organs down. I mean, just it's just shocking stuff. And what I think we can say, what I feel is that TikTok is legitimately serving up, suggesting suicide as a way to deal with a teenager's problems, or at the very least, encouraging the depression and anxiety feelings and kind of feeding off of that in these young kids. So it's a very dangerous platform. And a lot of parents and a lot of experts in the space that I speak to, it's the number one platform they actually restrict for their own children.
Yeah, that is always interesting when I hear interviews with big tech people. They're like,
Hmm.
"Oh, no, our kids aren't on it at all."
Yeah, I
Uh,
know.
a couple of the things that you just mentioned. So, with as far as something I wanted to point out that I learned on your podcast with one of your
Hmm.
guests, I don't recall his name when he was talking about TikTok, that people
Hmm.
don't realize because they'll say, well, why is TikTok being singled out? All the social media companies. What
Hmm.
people don't realize is that because it's a communist country that the government can request
Yeah.
this information from the companies.
Yes.
Unlike the United States, they would need a search warrant. It would be years
Yes.
of court. And we've had some high profile cases where they went to Facebook and said we need some records, and they were,
Yeah.
we so that's an issue. But
Great
another
point.
well, I just learned that on your podcast because I
Yeah. Yeah, I should have said that. So the Chinese Communist Party can request data from any Chinese company at any time, and they have to hand it over. So that's where the concern really lies when it comes to national security. Yes, thank you for clarifying that.
well, and the other thing, when you talk about serving up, because I had never used that word, like I
Mm,
think if I understood one of your podcasts correctly,
hmm.
that even if a teenager, they don't have to even type in like
Right.
what are some ways to commit suicide. They're not even looking for that. They might just put
Hmm.
like I'm sad today, or
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling sad, and all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden they're
Yeah.
getting bombarded like something they didn't even ask for. It's there in front of them. It's
Mm-hmm.
just it's really stomach turning and distressing.
Yeah.
I would be so scared if I had kids. Uh,
Yeah.
let's talk about what oh well still on TikTok for can you talk about you kind of touched on how algorithms work and then
Mm-hmm.
some of these social media challenges because I had seen a couple
Mm-hmm.
like they'll talk about it in the news for someone out there who
Mm-hmm.
doesn't know what this is. Just talk about what's happening with social media challenges.
Yeah. So you may have heard of, let's see, like the choking challenge or a different huffing challenge, things like that. So those go viral on YouTube, TikTok, different video type social media platforms. And so it'll be videos of kids trying a challenge on the video live and then posting it. So, and it encourages other kids to try these challenges too. And some, there's like a cinnamon challenge, and some can be fairly harmless, but there are many challenges that are deadly. So I interviewed a mom named Joanne Bogard, and her son Mason tried the choking challenge a couple of years ago, I think at 15 or 16 years old, and he died. And so what parents need to know regarding this is that your child may find one of these videos and think it looks interesting or funny or fun and want to try it. And we have to warn them that it can be deadly in some of these cases and that they just can't try these challenges. And one thing that stands out to me that Joanne shared is she has spent every day since her son died reporting challenge videos that are dangerous on several different platforms, and they very rarely get removed. So, they get a lot of views, and that's what's most important to these platforms is to get the engagement and the profit, not that it could be dangerous for kids.
That's crazy. That
Mm-hmm.
well, hopefully, I know that we're gonna later into the interview, we're gonna get into some of the current legislation, which and
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to see the moves that Florida has made. Can you just kind of quickly differentiate between like TikTok,
Mm-hmm.
Snapchat, Facebook? Because there's so many now, and people might not realize the difference. Like, is this one as dangerous as this one?
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, so Facebook, I would say most kids aren't really using it. I do hear about actually kids accessing it on school devices often right now because Facebook is one of those that the schools are not great at restricting. So I'm hearing that, but generally kids are on Snapchat, they're on TikTok, they're on YouTube, they're on Instagram. Some kids are trying a new one called Be Real, but I would say there's a lot of differences in the different platforms, but they share a lot of the same harms. I'd say Snapchat is probably my least favorite platform, where they just have it's just stacked with harmful functionality. From the disappearing messages, just the pure function of the app. The purpose of the app is for your messages and videos and photos to disappear, which just encourages bad behavior. Uh, they have Snap Map, which allows your child to share the location with anyone else on Snapchat, including predators or drug dealers or whoever they want. So they also have a ranking feature where your friends on Snapchat get ranked 1 through 8 based on how much you've interacted with them, but purely just the fueled anxiety of teenagers when it comes to how you're ranked with your friends is just a problem. And they also have an encrypted area called My Eyes Only where kids hide content too. So yeah, Snapchat, not great. A lot of parents just think they're just chatting on there with their friends, but they can get access to anybody and anyone can get access to them. TikTok, we already talked about, not just silly dance videos, lots of harmful content, challenges, suicide content, content that fuels depression and things like that. So we have to be careful with TikTok. Their algorithm is very smart, probably one of the most, I would say dangerous algorithms when it comes to being addictive. Instagram, kids are using Instagram. I mean, I use it to promote my podcast. I'm an adult. Again, we're talking about kids here, but Instagram just makes some interesting decisions. Like recently, they decided, okay, we're going to blur nude images in direct messages, which I I saw that and I was like, wonderful. Kids shouldn't be able to see nude images. And then I looked at the article and I read the detail. And so what it actually does is the image is blurred in the direct message, but it has some little text on top that says this could be nudity, but you can still click it and see the nude image behind the blur, which you think a teenager is going to see a blurred image that could be nudity and not click on it. I think it just encourages them to look even more. And then Instagram was recently found to be making money advertising off of Nudify apps, which are AI apps in the App Store that use AI to generate nude images of anyone you upload into the app. Could be a fellow student. For some of these kids are doing that. And Instagram was advertising these apps, which, so I'm often disappointed at some of the decisions that come through Instagram, and they are getting contacted by predators on there as well. So yeah, I'm not, I don't love any of the social media platforms that are available for kids, but those are some of the differences in regard to the harmful aspects of each of those. I'm happy to dive further into any of them that you're interested in.
Well, I only learned of the Nudify apps last week on your podcast. I had never
Uh-huh.
heard of those. That's kind of wild, just to take a photo of anybody. And I saw you had put something up that shows how, and it just could make you or I right now look naked. It's weird.
Realistically naked. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really scary. A lot of states are having to pass legislation um, to be able to deal with this issue. And in some states now, it's a felony when it comes to a minor, making a minor look nude through these apps. So we have to talk to our kids about not using these apps, because we could get in trouble too. That's our phone. And even if they're doing something like that on their phone, it actually belongs to us. So we need to be careful.
Well, one thing I had, because I'm not on most of them, I'm on Facebook.
Hmm.
But during the pandemic, there was a really well-known news anchor. I just can't think of her name right now, but I remember her like 13 years old son had overdosed, and she was like, what, went into his room and what happened, because he hadn't, they were always with him during that first year of COVID. Hardly anybody was going anywhere. Like, how on earth did he overdosed on, he got some pills that were laced, and then they
Hmm.
found out, I want to say it was through Snapchat, he had met some
Hmm.
drug dealer. There's all these codes that the kids, she didn't learn that till after the fact, but she had
Yeah.
no idea. He had
Right.
just like left the house maybe one day, Mom, I'm going to go for a walk, I got to get some air. But
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, drugs are a thing as well, drug availability.
Hmm.
I'd like to know, you talked about, because I wasn't real familiar. I've heard the word, I didn't really know what it meant.
Hmm.
And what is encryption, end-to-end encryption, and why does
Uh-huh.
that make these apps so dangerous?
Yeah. Okay. So end-to-end encryption, and I'm not, a technologist, but basically it
Yeah.
encrypts the chat. So only the people in the chat will be able to see the content of the chat. Even law enforcement can't get in to see it. Sort of scrambles it if if anyone else tries to see it. So this is dangerous because it encourages and enables crimes against children, just based off of what we're seeing happen. So adult predators they use encrypted apps to target and groom children because, the evidence gets destroyed. No one can find out that they did that. So it's a dangerous thing to include. And Facebook just recently added end-to-end encryption to their Facebook Messenger, which was very disappointing for parents.
Okay. I want to hear, because a term I heard last week on one of your episodes. It was, I think, is it called Finstas, and what that
Mm.
stands for? Because
Hmm.
I again, probably I'm very naive. I don't have kids, and
Yeah.
it was like secondary, something about secondary fake accounts. So even if parents think that they're, oh, I'm, and because
Hmm.
they're, well, let's talk about it, because I heard about it on your episode when you were
Hmm.
talking about a young man named Mason Eden. Let's just touch
Hmm.
on that, and who he was and what happened and what his parents found out after the facts. Because I think that was the episode when you mentioned the Finstas, that they found out later because the parents thought they were doing everything right. So let's talk
Yeah.
about him.
And his mom, Jenny, I'm actually going to be interviewing her soon. So I don't have all of the details, but what I can tell you is that Mason and lots of other kids were set up multiple social media accounts. So their parent might know of the main one where the parent is checking on, but they'll create fake ones or duplicate ones to have other activity that they might not want their parents knowing about. And these are kids call them finstas, fake Instagrams for Instagram. And I've heard now the term snap trap for a fake or a duplicate Snapchat account. And Snapchat actually says they don't allow for multiple accounts for each individual, but they don't enforce it because they shouldn't be able to create multiple accounts using the same phone number or email address. Um, Kids often will use other devices in the household as well. So you want to be careful about if you have like an old iPad in the drawer.
Mm.
I think that's how, in the story of Mason Edens, he was able to create some duplicate. When his phone was taken away, he would use an old iPad in the home. And, you know, I'll wait till share his full story through his mom, Jenny.
Okay.
But basically, he died by suicide after being served lots of suicidal content through TikTok and lots of videos encouraging suicide by handgun, and that's how he ended up dying. So his family is suing TikTok for serving this harmful content to their child, and it deems the question: would Mason have done that if not for those TikTok videos? So,
Like kind of prompted or pushed into it.
yeah.
Yeah, I had no idea like this kind of content
Mm-hmm.
until I started listening to your podcast. I just was really naive
Mm-hmm.
to all that. And
Yeah.
then there's been a couple high profile cases. I think most people have heard of it. Just kind of what sextortion is and
Mm.
Snapchat and why. So how they're lured into sharing, especially the younger their photos. It does happen with young men too, and they're even more embarrassed that they got tricked and then they're extorted. And I have seen on the news a few of these young teenagers who've killed themselves as a
Yeah.
of the sextortion, if you want to go into that a little bit.
Yeah. So mostly teen boys are getting targeted right now. And they're actually, law enforcement has figured out that there's a sextortion ring in Nigeria calling themselves the Yahoo Boys. And they use very tried and true scripts to target and convince our teenage kids, mostly boys, to send a nude. And then they extort them through the platform to give them money. And they relentlessly go back and ask for more money, or they're going to share that nude image with. So the extorter pretends to be a young female and flirt with the boy, and may even send a nude photo with him, and then he'll send one back, and then the extortion starts. So it's so devastating in some cases, like the case of Jordan DeMay, who I'm interviewing his dad, John, soon. Jordan, I mean, the whole interaction was like, I think an hour, like it from first communication to him dying by suicide, because these boys are so devastated that they've done this embarrassing thing. And the extorter one of these men literally created a collage of all the boys' friends with the nude image in the middle, and was like, I'm going to send this to all here. I know who all your friends are, because they have
Um,
access to so much information through these public social media profiles, or even private if they've gotten added. So, yeah, unfortunately, parents have to have a lot of conversations with our kids that we don't want to have. And this is one of them. We have to introduce to our teenagers, specifically our preteen and teenage boys, that if they get contacted by someone online, it's could be anybody. It could be anybody anywhere, and you cannot ever share a nude image online.
I can't remember who it was. A few months back, I saw an older comedian and he kind of put something that went viral. He's like, this is for the dudes only. And all the things you just said, like,
Mm-hmm.
but he does it in a real funny, comedic way. He's like, look,
Yeah.
guys, women aren't as, excited about art
Yeah.
as we are about
Yeah.
boys. So if
Right.
anybody asks you for a picture and you
Yeah.
think it's a girl, it's not, it's some guy. And I,
Yeah.
but it
I
was
mean,
really, it's sad because, well, people get scammed every day when
yeah.
you're lonely, and there's been a lot of loneliness and sadness, isolation. People are more isolated, and
Mm-hmm.
when you're in a vulnerable state,
Mm-hmm.
I've always kind of had this like inner motto that desperate people do desperate things, and
Mm-hmm.
whether it's crime, when you're desperate for money, you're much more inclined to do something in a desperate.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're an incredibly lonely person, you're an adolescent and everyone around you at school is getting attention from the opposite sex, and you're
Mm-hmm.
lonely, or you're divorced, or you've never, and here you are
Yeah.
sitting at home and somebody presents themselves as a beautiful, but just
Yeah.
the last few nights on CBS News here in Los Angeles has been
Hmm.
profiling middle-aged women that got scammed out of money. And
Hmm.
educate, you're like, how does this millions of dollars? But
Yeah.
they
Wow.
weren't, that wasn't through social media. They just get conned. But if it
Yeah.
happened to grown adults, what kind of pivoting in another direction, because I want to
Hmm.
get into like some of the legislation and things, but what
Hmm.
I had never heard of Discord. Can you talk about, because I'm not a gamer, so can you
Yeah.
talk about what Discord is?
Sure. And I wasn't familiar with it either because I'm not a gamer. But what I've learned, so Discord is an online communication platform, and a lot of kids, I think it's like almost 4 billion people use Discord, like almost half of the world, and maybe 3.3. And
Wow.
uh, gamers use it while they're gaming to chat. So they can chat through video, they can chat text, and they create like, I think it's called parties, but basically groups that all chat together while they all play together. And you don't have to be gaming to use Discord, but that's its primary use. And it's one of those platforms where there can be a lot of cyberbullying and a lot of grooming because you're talking about an
Mm.
online chatting platform that is highly unregulated, that is bringing together children and adults. And adults who want to prey on children are going to go to the platform where they know children are. And so when I look up predation stories and grooming stories, a lot of times is happening on Discord.
Okay, yeah. Well, you brought up something called grooming, which is great. Just the other day,
Hmm.
I'm going on a lot of tangents, but there's a
Hmm.
very popular documentary now on HBO Max. I don't know if you've heard of it, called Quiet on the Set. Have you
I
heard of
have,
this?
I have, but I haven't watched it.
Okay, well, I guess it's
Write it
really
down.
intense. It just came out a few weeks ago, and
Okay.
most of my patients, everyone who's been coming in, but it's all about the child exploitation here in Hollywood, like
Okay.
in
Right.
the 80s and the 90s. But
Yeah.
it's a real eye opener. But even there's a comedian, and he's got a show, Bill Maher, right, on
Yeah.
HBO.
Yeah.
And he talks about politics, but he does it in a comedic way. And he's pretty left leaning, and probably
Yes.
left leaning. And even
Hmm.
he put a video that went viral that was super funny the other day about like people that they'll allow kids to be, he does it in a much more explicit way, but kids,
Hmm.
the people, just because they're like political enemies, rather
Hmm.
than acknowledge that kids are being exploited
Hmm.
in very graphic ways.
Yeah.
Come on, people, get it together. Like, you can't
Hmm.
allow this just because we're on different ends of politically. We should come together when it comes to protecting our kids, at least.
Yes.
And and
Totally.
and basically, like, we find them where the kids are, whether it's the
Hmm.
abuse that's happened in the churches or the Boy Scouts or now
Hmm.
Hollywood, that it was happening on kids shows. He's like these pedophiles. And what you just said, I guess the groomers, they go where the kids are. If the kids are all gaming,
Hmm.
to find them. But
Yeah.
we talked about the Nudify apps a little bit. So let's talk about some of the current legislation that's happening. Some
Hmm.
of the online privacy bills, and there's, I
Hmm.
guess, 33 pending lawsuits against Meta. Oh, but actually, before that, you had
Hmm.
an analogy in one of your videos that I loved,
Hmm.
comparing social media to
Mm.
gambling, about the intermittent, because I never thought about it, but even now, like, I feel like sometimes even though I feel like LinkedIn is healthy, it's helping me meet people like you. But
Hmm.
sometimes it'll be 3 in the morning. I'm like, you're getting addicted. You got to go to bed. This is silly.
Yeah.
I could just
Yeah.
spend every minute of the day on, but,
Hmm.
but let's talk about that.
Yeah. So I've learned a lot about this recently from Dr. Gloria Mark, who has a book called Attention Span, which is a very interesting book. But basically, social media uses similar tactic to gambling where it's intermittent reinforcement. You don't get the reward every single time. You get it at unexpected times. And it's almost that anticipation that that comment that I read or that video I watch is going to be extra exciting for me, but most are not. Most aren't that exciting. So it uses some of that same psychology that gambling does. And these social media companies, they study our brains, our children's brains, in order to make things habit forming and addictive. And even there used to be a conference, an annual conference in Silicon Valley called the Habit Summit. And these companies would all go and talk about how to make their product more habit forming, which I just find offensive when it comes to something that you're marketing to children, because we don't want to create habits in children when it that require them to be online. Like the kids need to be kids and they need to be outside playing and interacting with each other. We don't need them addicted to devices. So yeah, I also found that very interesting how social media can compare to gambling, and a lot of people use, social media addiction, gambling addiction in similar sentences and paragraphs. It's very similar in the way that it addicts us.
Kind of scary. I
Yeah.
find it happening to myself where I'm like, don't get on the computer on Sundays. Do not check, don't do
Hmm.
anything. Um,
Yeah, and you're an adult with a fully formed brain, and we have
yeah.
these kids with that they're so impulsive and they just aren't able. Their brain isn't ready to be able to have to regulate that type of addictive product. So,
About my nephew in Hawaii, he's 15 now, and I don't think actually now he's really into surfing and sports. I don't think he spends a lot of time on social media. It doesn't look like
good.
he's an
Yeah.
outside kid. Well,
Yeah.
but I remember visiting them once when he was like 5, and my brother and his wife, and that becomes a conflict because usually one parent feels a little more strongly about like
Yeah.
this, and the other one's like, no, they can have the phone at the table. But I remember him taking the phone away from I think my nephew was about 5 at the time, and it was
Hmm.
really, he looked like he was hyperventilating,
Mm.
screaming,
Yeah.
crying. It
Yeah.
was like watching a junkie.
Yeah.
All he did is wanted to no phone during dinner time.
Yeah, well, it's spiking his dopamine, and then that drops, and you're going to take that away from him. Of course, that's not in their control. Of course, they're going to have that big reaction, but that is when it's a problem, and that's when parents need to take it away more often, or restrict it.
Yeah, it was. Well, let's talk about some of the one of your podcasts mentioned that there's like 33 pending lawsuits against
Hmm.
Facebook and some of these other like online privacy bills that have been introduced, because you've been talking and having lots of discussions with people just so.
Hmm.
And then I'll put it on. When I edit this, I'll put it up there. But I didn't know there's a website called house.gov that you mentioned
Hmm.
on your podcast, where
Yeah.
people, when there are bills and things like, because a lot of times you'll hear like, well, I don't have any idea who my representatives are, how to contact
Hmm.
them. And on
Yeah.
this website that you shared, house.gov,
Hmm.
it'll show you exactly who your representatives are and how to contact them. And,
Hmm.
and a phone call can go a long way. It really can.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
talk about some of the legislation out
Hmm.
there that's what's happening with efforts to protect kids.
Sure. Yeah, so I give parents a lot of advice on how we can protect our kids through our decisions, but we can only do so much when the platforms are made to be addictive to our children. And so we need any legislation to require them to make them not addictive for children and make them safer for children. So this has also come in tandem with lots of lawsuits against the big tech companies. So over 3 dozen states are suing the parent company of Instagram and Facebook, so it's Meta, over concerns that the platform's addictive features are harming teens' mental health, which they are. There's also over 200 school districts here in the U.S. suing big tech, also
Wow.
native tribes, also tons of individual families. So there's lawsuits coming from all directions, which is important because we need to hit them where it hurts, and the only thing they care about, which is their pocketbook and their profits. Um, but the legislation is probably the most important piece. And there was a recent congressional hearing a couple weeks ago about where they discussed 9 different federal online safety bills. And a lot of those are very important for us to pass to just make the platforms safer by design. And I would say that you should research all of them. Parents should research all of them. But KOSA, Kids Online Safety Act, is very important. Should have passed years ago. And I'm really hoping that will pass this year. KOSA will require the platforms to make the platform safer by design, also give some transparency, allow a third party to be reviewing the platforms and what they're doing. So no one's checking on them now, sort of grading their own homework currently.
I've
Uh, and then yeah,
never heard that phrase. Okay, very good.
yeah. And I would also recommend looking into Sammy's Law. So Sammy's Law, which just is doing well here in California, but federally we should have Sammy's Law available. So that will allow us to get deeper into the platforms with parental monitoring. So we can have a parental monitoring app on our phone that actually can read and see the photos on these social media platforms and give parents alerts if and when something harmful comes into our child's view. So that's a really important bill as well. And there's several others, and parents can learn about these bills, but you don't even have to know about a bill. You can just tell your representative that you're worried about your kid's online safety, or a personal story like my kid got on TikTok and I didn't want him to. Why don't I have to give permission? So you can go to house.gov, and at the top right, you just enter your zip code. And then what you'll see is who are your representatives, and you can either call them or email them. And you can say any of those things. Or if you like one of the bills, you can say, please support this bill. But you don't have to be a policy expert at all. And this is something that I've just started learning about, and I'm so passionate about because it was so easy to do. And if all parents, if even, you know, you don't even need millions of parents to do this, but if thousands of parents go on and start pushing on our elected officials that we elected to do what's in our best interest, we have to tell them what we want them to do, and that's keep our kids safe online, simply. So I really encourage parents to go to house.gov and just take the 2 minutes to let them know how you feel about these topics.
Yeah, so much good information on your podcast, and that does
Thank
make
you.
it easy because yeah, I there's been many times I thought, yeah, I should, but if you don't know who your it's hard to find. And but now
Totally.
I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let's talk about age appropriate. Like, is it ever, at what age do you think social media is? I'm curious about you.
Hmm.
You've mentioned that you had kids, how old they are, if they're allowed to have. And I did hear, I think it was just a couple weeks ago, Ron DeSantis,
Hmm.
the governor of Florida, very
Yeah.
controversial, but I think most people are on board. I've seen a few negative comments, but I
Mm.
think they're the first state to completely ban social media for kids under
Hmm.
14 or 15, and even
Hmm.
with parental consent they're just banning it. And I think some other things passed, but I know they were the first state. They're the
Hmm.
most aggressive, and I think it's great that they're looking
Yeah.
at kids. So let's hear your thoughts on, do
Yeah.
you think any of them are okay at, like, as a teenager, or are you just keeping your kids off all of them, period?
Yeah. So my kids are young still, so 8, 6, and 3. So I'm years away, I think, from having to make this decision. And so, I'm not feeling the pressure like a lot of parents are currently, that all my friends are on it and, they're 13 or 14, and feeling that pressure and like their kids are being left out. So I want to start there, that I'm not feeling that pressure yet when I answered this question. But with the way that social media platforms are currently built, with no regulation, no transparency, extremely harmful and extremely addictive, right now it's a no for me, for my kids, on social media use. I don't use it personally, only for my business, and I don't want to integrate it into our family and how we choose to spend our time. Obviously, remember, my kids are young, so I don't feel that pressure yet. But I'm hopeful that some of this legislation that we talked about, the federal legislation, will require the platforms to be safer by design by the time my kids get to be old enough to ask and want social media. So if that happens, and some of these addictive features and algorithms and things like that, and harmful advertising, that if all of that were to go away, I think I'll be much more open to letting them access social media. These state by state laws that are being passed, so Florida's law that you have to be 14 to even use social media at all, and they have to verify the age now. So that's important, and I'm very interested to see how they verify age, because many people are hesitant to share personal information that verifies your age. But so 14 and under, sorry, so under 14, no social media use at all. 14 and 15 years old, you have to get parental permission. And then 16 and up, you're good to go. Georgia also just passed a law under 16, no social media, and you
Wow.
have to verify age. So this is what I've heard with these state by state laws. It's like patchwork that's going to have to all come together at some point, with federal legislation that's going to better guide us on what age is actually appropriate. And so I'm more hopeful. Yes, I'm happy that states are regulating and bringing the age limit up and actually verifying age, but I'm hopeful for federal legislation that provides us better guidance across the whole United States on what age is appropriate and how to verify that.
Oh, yeah, I think I heard that in one of your podcasts from a guest. The yeah, national policy would be helpful because
Yeah.
we got, the complete, I think you're here in California, right?
Yes. Yeah.
County. I
Yeah.
mean, our ideals here are just the polar opposite of Florida on this issue. I'm extremely happy to see that. And I even have mixed feelings about I'm doing a show about mental health, and
Mm-hmm.
there's all these apps which were great during COVID and
Mm-hmm.
online because a lot of people, but at the same time, there's a little part of me that's like, well, anything that makes people online even, but that's not the harmful, but I
Mm-hmm.
think it's healthy to be with people in real life and if
Mm-hmm.
possible. So, and I feel like that has led to a lot of the isolation the kids are feeling. It's not a
Yeah.
real, it's online friendships instead of actually going and
Mm-hmm.
knocking on your kids actually being with other kids and adults and
Yeah. I think a lot of people talk about it as like an opportunity cost. So, like, what are you losing out on by spending the time on these, whatever app it is? If it's like the mindfulness app, right? You're still on your phone or you're still looking at something
that,
on a screen,
that's my
which,
point. Yeah, to me,
yeah,
you're still on a screen instead of getting out.
yes. And kids are exercising less and it's affecting their mental and physical health. They're not sleeping. I would say, like, the biggest thing I try to share is don't let your kid have their device in the bedroom, especially unrestricted access. But even if it's a bark phone that's super locked down, they shouldn't have it in their room at night because it keeps them up. And teachers are saying kids are like falling asleep. They're exhausted in first period of school, especially high schoolers, because they're up till 2, 3 in the morning on these addictive platforms. How could they not be?
Um, how have you seen, there's been some research about the young women. There's like where the studies will show that there's a huge increase in suicidal because of
Yeah.
the comparisons. And if you want to talk about filters, I didn't put that on the list because I've never
Mm-hmm.
used a filter in my life, but I
Mm-hmm.
guess a lot of the young women
Mm-hmm.
are using. Do you know much about the filter apps and things like that?
Yeah, I know that females are female teenagers are being affected really negatively by their social media use. I think it's like teen girls are spending an average of 20 hours a week on social media, and it's being compared to like it's their part-time job. And and teen girls, most of them are saying they feel persistently sad or hopeless. And 30%, I think, like I shared previously, have seriously considered suicide. Um, Rates of self harm for and suicide are way up for teenage girls. So that there's a direct connection between that, all of those stats, and the amount of time they're spending on social media and just the comparison. And I mean, I don't have stats around like the using filters and things like that, but imagine they can not only use filters, but they can pinch in parts of their cheeks and push out their breasts or push out their
Oh,
butt and bring in their waist. And that's not reality. Like, none of
yeah.
that should be available to teenage girls. Then they go out in the real world and they feel terrible about themselves because they don't look like that person that they created on their phone. Like, that's crazy. So, yeah, it may seem innocuous, like, oh, it's just a filter, it's just some editing, but it really affects how they feel about themselves and how they feel in comparison to how other people look, which when they see other people on these apps, they're not real either. So it's like just all like all fake and all not good for these girls' mental health. And boys are being affected a lot too. They're being targeted with a lot of supplements and exercise routines, and it's causing actually a rise in eating disorders in males as well,
Oh, I wasn't.
which is interesting. Yeah.
Well, is there anything else that like I didn't really hit on? I mean, there's so much that you cover. Anybody listening to this, I hope that you'll check
Mhm.
out Nikki's podcast. It is called Scrolling to Death. It's on YouTube and probably all the major platforms. But
Mhm.
any other topics you want to touch
Mhm.
on that I might not have brought up or things that you think are real timely?
Yeah, I mean, I think just generally, it's really important for parents these days more than ever to be educated on topics related to screens that we're giving our children. We have to know what they could see and who they could encounter so that we can warn them or educate them on what could come their way and how to handle it. And so that's sort of what I focus on the podcast. And there's short clips on Instagram and YouTube. But also, I recommend listening to the longer form interviews. And thank you for, I can tell you've listened to a lot of them because that's where like the
I'm
real,
learning
you
so
know,
much. Like it's
yeah.
scary. It's
I
just
mean, and
scary.
we need to listen to longer form content too. I mean, we need to keep our attention spans exercised as well and keep listening to that longer form stuff. But regarding anything else that's topical, I mean, I do a Friday update called the Big Tech Gut Check, and it's about social media and big tech. It's like usually 6 to 8 minutes long. And that I feel like is what parents should really be listening to so they know what's going on that week regarding the platforms that their kids are spending time on. And it's just like this week, Snapchat released this new feature that could be harmful. Make sure you talk to your kid about it because they could be accessing it and be in harm's way. And so it's just like talking points for how to bring things up, and you want to be the expert on these things so that they come to you when they have an issue on there. So you need to unfortunately be educated on things that might be boring for you, or not that interesting, but I think we need to take it seriously on how our kids are getting negatively affected by these platforms and educate ourselves so that we can protect them. And I'm sure there's a million things that are not coming to my mind right now on what else we could talk about, but I feel like we did cover a lot of good stuff.
No, I jumped around a lot. There
No.
is there is something I think it's pending. I don't know if it's just recently introduced in Congress
Hmm.
or if it's a local level. They want to like ban phones at school altogether.
Okay. Yeah.
And I had mixed feelings because I mostly because I think, oh, what if there's a mass shooting, which is an awful thing to think
Let's talk about that.
of. So
So let me
yeah.
ask you a question. Do you feel that having your child having a device on them makes them safer in a shooting situation?
Oh, well, when you put it that way, probably not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Only that they could call their parents or call for help, but that's about
But
it.
do you think that they should be making phone calls during a school shooting when in
Oh,
reality they're supposed to be quiet and listening to what their teacher is telling them to do? So I've spoken a lot about this, and I just was talking about this right before this call.
oh,
And it has been found through lots of research and conversation that having your kid having a smartphone on them in the case of a school shooting makes them more unsafe. They need to be listening to what they're being told to do. They need to be dead quiet. They need to be their phone should not be lighting up or dinging. So all of these things. Plus, there was one example that someone just gave me. Actually, I don't have enough detail on it. But imagine a school shooter going through a school and opening a classroom door, and you have a kid on the floor in the dark, but then their phone lights up. Where's that shooter going to shoot to? They're going to shoot to that phone. So there's just a
okay.
plethora of reasons that have been shared with me through law enforcement and other people that argument, if we really think it through, how a phone it does make them more unsafe in that situation. Obviously, you want to know that your child is okay, but the issues that it can cause, I think, outweigh the need for you to know what's going on in that moment. So I love that. I mean, this
I
is a
just,
terrible thing that happens in America, especially, but this is something that people comment all the time, and I always want to address that specifically. Um, but we got to get phones out of the classrooms. We have to. Kids are not focusing. Our test scores are lower and lower across the globe, and a lot of that is due to the fact that kids are distracted and not listening in on lessons.
so what is policy right now? Like at junior high and high schools, do most of them allow kids to bring their phones? Just keep them like off during the day?
I think
Or
it's 80% of schools in the US technically have a smartphone ban, but that just means It doesn't really mean anything. They can have it on them. They just are not supposed to use it during school, during the class time. So
Okay.
that leaves it up to each individual teacher to enforce it. And the teachers don't want to have that contentious relationship with the students. And so they end up giving up because they don't want to have to fight it all. I mean, they can't spend their whole lesson playing a game of whack-a-mole, like trying to figure out who's on their phones and tell them to put it down. So the teachers are really struggling, and I've been interviewing teachers, so I know they're telling me they can't be allowed at school at all. So some schools are implementing the Yonder pouches, where they're like magnetic pouches that when the kid walks into the school, they put their phone inside the pouch, it gets locked, and they can't access it at all during the school day. At the end of the day, they unlock it and they can have their phone back.
Wow.
That would be, I think, a really helpful policy. Kind of crazy, but I think that would, they can't think of another way I haven't seen another way that where it's super successful regarding getting it out of their hands. And at the minimum, parents, your kid doesn't necessarily need a smartphone at school. They could do a dumb phone or a watch.
Oh,
Um, and also, a lot of teachers are saying, parents, please stop texting your kids during the day about non-urgent topics because it distracts them.
I have to remember a couple times I forget about the time difference. And yeah, with my nephew in Hawaii, like, oh, don't
Yeah.
during school. I've done that.
No one would think about that. You're like, oh, I just want to know what they want for dinner. Parents assume they'll answer me on a break, but the kids don't, and they pull it out in class and
Yeah.
they answer you. But then guess what? They're pulled over to their TikTok feed. They're pulled over to their Instagram feed. They're completely disengaged. So we just have to like think through: is it something that could wait till after school, or when I know they're on lunch break, or something like that?
Most of them can. All
Yeah,
right, Nikki. Well, this is just, I really appreciate your time. I learned so
yeah,
much. I'm going to continue. Everybody, one last time, Nikki's podcast is called Scrolling to Death. And
hmm,
hopefully we'll be meeting in person one of these days.
yeah. We're
I,
nearby.
well, my goal is we pitched this a couple years ago and then the strike happened, but we're pitching it as a docu-style TV show. So I hope
Cool.
that's where this goes. But until then, I thought the podcast would, and it's helping me build relationships and meet people like yourself in
Yeah.
all these fields. So I look forward to meeting you one day in person and thank you so much.
Me too. Thank you, Janice, and thank you for everything that you do.
All right. Have a good afternoon.
Okay, you
Bye.
too.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us for another episode of American Mood Swings, where we talk about the brain and all things mental health. Hope to see you next week, and please share with your friends.